to take a look at purchasing and how we actually generate purchase orders within the system. There are multiple different ways that we generate purchase orders. So previously we had looked at the different types of POs that we support with our dropship and standard PO, and we looked at how we set those up by going into our gear and the purchase order types. And again, we have our standard and dropship that we've defaulted in. So on our left-hand navigation, we have our purchase order search, where we can look at we can look at all the POs that are currently in the system. And we can also create new POs from here as well. So we have our drop down where we can create a new standard PO. Typically, we're not going to allow the user to create a dropship PO from scratch. That's going to be done from within a sales document, and we'll look at that shortly. But I have my PO search. I can drill into an existing PO. I can see the information that's on the PO, the items that are on that PO, the cost and the quantity, so forth. And I can see interactions about this purchase order. I can see the audits for the PO, and I can see any notes specific to this purchase order. I can also see the location that my PO is being shipped to. Previously, I had mentioned in our location setup that we really want to make sure that we fill out that address for that location, because that is what's going to show in this ship to address. So if I change this to a different location and I have an address populated, then it's going to fill in my ship to address. Or if I need to manually fill that in, I can expand the drawer and fill that ship to address in. Typically though, we want that to default off of your location that you have set on that location. So if I do change locations, you'll see that I do get a pop-up prompting me to roll that location down to the lines. Typically we want that the lines to match what's on the header, but I could change that on a line-by-line basis. The problem with changing it on the line-by-line basis is that currently there is no way to reflect that on the purchase report or the purchase PO that you may send to your vendor. We don't have anything that's actually showing line level address location. So it's something that we can add in the future, but just be aware of that if you are trying to set up or to purchase on the same PO across multiple locations. So I have my purchase order search. Again, this is a grid just like any other grid that we're looking at, where I can add additional columns. I can rearrange these columns. And again, it only is affecting my environment. If I wanted to pull a total over next to my PO type, I can do that. And then I have the additional columns that I can add to the sales or to the purchase search screen. Also have the same auto filter drop down where I can filter this data if I want to see everything from a specific vendor. So I want to see everything that's coming from the Villazon factory. Then I can filter that down as well and show just POs for that. I can also just reset or clear all those auto filters from a column drop down. So again, I have my purchase orders. I also have my vendor search. And so we've talked about vendors previously, but from the vendor card is another place that I can generate POs, and again, specific for this vendor. So let's take a look at the different ways that we can create POs. We'll start on the vendor card. Typically, we're going to see users, just like on the sales side of it, when I am going to create a new sales transaction, I'm going to start with my customer. So I'm going to go to my customer card, I'm going to look up that customer, open up the customer card, and then create a new sales transaction. Drop down from the top right on the customer card and generate a new sales transaction, whether that's a sales order, quote, whatever. On the purchasing side, a lot of times we're going to do the same thing. If I'm purchasing for inventory, from my vendor lookup. So I'm going to go find my vendor. I know what vendor I'm going to order X number of items from. So I'll go find my vendor, and then again, I can create a new purchase order from that vendor from here. So I can do it as a standard PO off of my drop down. There's another way that we can do that from the vendor card. I can also go to my items tab. If this vendor has one or more vendor items set up, in this case I have, and I'm on my Cigar International vendor, so I have 3 items that are set up that I purchase primarily from this vendor. I can go ahead and check one or more of these line items, and I can generate a PO from here also. And so this goes ahead and creates my PO for this vendor, as well as pushes those items over to my purchase order. So if I click standard, it's going to bring all 4 of those items over to my purchase order. Now, no quantities, they're all going to default with a quantity of 1. And so then I would just have to go through and modify my quantity. Now, it will pull that unit cost that I had specified on that vendor item tab. And so really all I'm having to do here is now just set those quantities. We would also respect the unit of measure. If you had a different vendor unit of measure that you purchased in for that, that item from that vendor, we would pull that information over as well and set that unit of measure. So again, that's one quick way if you are constantly ordering those same items or types of items from that vendor. You can go from the vendor card, go to the vendor item tab, select one or more items there, and generate and push those items to a PO for that vendor. That's probably the easiest way to create that purchase order, because again, that is it is populating those lines over. The only other time that we do that same type of functionality is when we do SOP to POP, or linking purchase orders to a sales order, which we'll walk through that shortly. So from the vendor card, then I have those two ways that I can create my purchase orders. I can either do it from the drop down on the vendor card itself, or I can go to the items tab on the vendor card and push those items to a purchase order. So from the purchase search, we already mentioned we can do the same thing from here. When I purchase or generate a PO from that purchase order search, there's no vendor defaulted on that PO, because again, I haven't specified a vendor. So the very first thing I would want to do then is pick my vendor, specify what vendor I'm purchasing from, and then I can go fill out default. So I have my address information, I can populate my shipping method, how I want it or expect it to be shipped to me, and then I can start adding line items onto this. And so again, this is a little bit more time consuming, and that I am now manually having to set some of those data elements. So manually picking the items, manually specifying my vendor, and picking some of those things like shipping methods, some of those things we can default in from that vendor card if you had started from that vendor to begin with. So again, unit cost is another one. We're going to pull in the item master's purchase cost, the default purchase cost, as well as the default purchasing unit of measure for that item. And so if I am purchasing, again, a different unit of measure or at a different cost from this vendor, then those are additional manual steps that I'm having to take to pull that information in. So that's from the vendor card, creating POs from the vendor card, and then also creating POs from the purchase search. So we'll take a look at what we call SOP to POP, or sales orders, linking sales orders to purchase orders. So if we go to a sales transaction, I'm actually going to jump to a customer card. We're going to use my Cool Cars customer. So I'm going to go find that customer, drill into my customer card, and I'm going to create a new sales transaction for that customer. So we're going to do a new sales order. So I'll add a couple line items to this sales transaction. So we have my Arturo Fuente 858. We have the Padron 1964. And then we'll have the El Rey del Mundo. So while I may have inventory of all of these items in stock, I am going to manually adjust those items so that I don't. So I'm going to up my quantity there. And I'm going to make sure that I have my quantity backorder column listed on the grid and my dropship column listed on the grid. So first we're going to talk about the backorder column and ordering for backorder quantity. So this item for this location, the Lowell warehouse, the Padron 1964, the customer has ordered 50 of those. I don't have enough inventory, so I end up having to backorder. The system automatically backorders 29 of those based off the inventory that I have available. So if I click the I, I'll be able to see the additional inventory that I have. So I only have 31 on hand, so I'm going to have to go ahead and the system backordered, which is why the system backordered the 29. So for this line item, if I need to check or go ahead and make a back order or purchase a back order item, and again, I am doing essentially a one-off purchase order that will just cover this sales transaction. I can check the box, click purchase selected, and then this is going to take me to a PO with that item and the quantity back order defaulted onto that line item. So it went ahead and added my item. It added a quantity of 29. I would have to specify a vendor. if I don't have a primary vendor set. And we see this red chain link. And so if I hover over that icon, it tells me that this item is linked to a sales document. I can increase this purchase order quantity, which will increase the, it has no bearing on my sales transaction. All this would mean is that I am now going to purchase additional quantity to stock in my warehouse. So maybe I'm going to set this to 100, and that would actually allow me to purchase and then receive 100 of this item. If I do the same thing and change the quantity on the sales line, so I could go back to my sales transaction. Let's, for example, the customer may call back and say, you know what, I need more than 50, I need 100 of those. So if we have fully back ordered that line and I increase my quantity on the sales document and I only have a single purchase order tied to that sales document, then that's also going to increase the quantity on my PO. Now on my PO, we do have a status that essentially it is marked as either new, to release the PO. Once I email or print the PO, it goes to a status of released. And then it's either, if any changes are made after it's been released, then it goes to change order. Once I print and email it again, then it goes back to released. Then it's either fully or partially received. And then I have a manual process of where I can close out my POs. So if a PO has been fully received, the system will then automatically close that PO out for you. So I have this purchase order with my quantity of 29. I can go to my linked sales lines, and again, this is just going to show me what sales document each line is linked to. And so I can see the quantity that's linked, what sales transaction it's linked to. If I now go back to my sales transaction, I see that same chain link showing on my sales side, and I have the same linked purchase orders type tab, just like I had on the purchasing side, where I can now see the purchase order that this the sales line is tied to and the quantity from that sales line on that purchase order. SalesPad does support linking multiple purchase orders to the same sales line, as well as linking the purchase line to multiple different sales orders. The other option that I would have had, so if I had quantity already back ordered for this line or quantity already purchased on a PO for this line, I would have the option to select the line, go to my button and click link selected. And then if I had available quantity to link, I could pick this line item and link it to any open or existing PO, which would create my same stop to pop link. So again, if I had a process where I am a purchasing agent is manually creating POs for large numbers or large quantities of items, I could go back, instead of doing an additional purchase order from my sales document, I could take that same sales line, link it to an existing open PO that has enough quantity on it, which would create that stop to pop commitment. So, and what that means is that when the purchase order is received, that quantity automatically gets allocated and fulfilled to the sales transaction. And that can be whether it's serialized, lot controlled, doesn't matter. Once that inventory is received, it automatically gets allocated, fulfilled to the sales transaction. The only time it will not fulfill the sales line is if I have manual fulfillment process turned on for a sales transaction. At that point, the system will allocate the inventory to the sales line, but will not fulfill. I will still have to manually fulfill it. So that's purchasing a standard PO off of a sales line. If I decided that I wanted to drop ship, so maybe I'm going to take this line item and I'm going to drop ship that quantity of that item to a customer, I can select the dropship checkbox, and again, I have to make sure I have it turned on or enabled in my grid, and I can move that around. So if I select the dropship value, and I can move this around and place it wherever I need to on my grid. But I've decided to dropship this line. I can now select this line item, click purchase selected. So you notice I did get an error message. So it tells me that this item, the Padron 1964, has already been fully purchased. So I'd have to create a new line item to allow it to be purchased again. So I'm going to say no, I don't want to do that. And again, it's because I had both of the boxes checked on the left-hand side. So now I'm going to uncheck the Padron line item and only select the El Radio Mundo. Now purchase selected, and I get my same date, so I can specify my purchase date on my PO. And so now, because I've flagged this as a dropship, this is going to create a dropship PO for me. And again, you'll see that it has a different numbering sequence. Other than that, the concept or the functionality is essentially the same. It does create a different type of PO, so it uses my dropship type PO. But again, going forward, the same process is in place. It's just the accounts that are hit and what happens from the accounting side once I do receive that purchase order. So again, dropship POs do require a receiving process. Even though you're not physically receiving that inventory, you do need to designate that your customer has received that inventory from your vendor. At that point, we will create the vendor bill over in QuickBooks Online. With dropship POs, we are not going to, so your vendor bill is going to look a little bit different as far as the accounts that are used on the vendor bill. You're going to see, of course, it's going to hit your payables account. But then it's also, instead of hitting your inventory account, we're going to hit an inventory dropship account that we've specified in our settings. Again, that can be changed by each company setup, however you decided to set up your company. But by default, we're going to hit a SalesPad inventory dropship account so that you can track your dropship inventory separately than your physical inventory that you keep on hand. So again, it's an offset account, a variance account that you can clear out at a later date. But the idea though is that it doesn't increase your inventory value because you never take ownership or possession of that inventory. So once I have my PO created, again, the functionality as far as the statuses, printing, emailing those POs, that's all the same. Even increasing the quantities, if I increase it on the sales line, it's going to increase my PO quantity as well. So there's a couple of other scenarios that we'll look at on the SOP to POP side, or linking purchase orders to sales orders. So I've got my 2 sales lines that I've already purchased. I'm going to add a couple additional lines. These will be some different items. So we'll do 100 of this one. We'll do a different L-ray line item here. And we'll do a number of those. So in this scenario, I have 10 back ordered on the Padron 4000. I'm just going to manually back order all 100 of those. So now it's fully back ordered. I could also manually back order this. So even if I didn't want to pull inventory, so again, maybe I'm running short on inventory, I don't want to pull all of it out of my stock. So again, I can manually back order those lines, which then allows me to purchase those lines. In this case though, I want one dropship and one as a back ordered line. Again, we have those should generate 2 different PO types or 2 different purchase orders. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of them. I'm going to go ahead and pick purchase selected. And so because one line is dropship and one line is back ordered, notice that it does not take me to a PO. It takes me to my PO search screen, and the message that popped up at the top told me that told me that POs were created and that they were linked. At this point, I could go back to my sales transaction. I should see a chain link then on both of those lines. And if I need to go modify those POs or send those POs to my vendor, again, I can see that they're linked. That's really where this link purchase orders tab comes into play when I'm doing multiple purchasing. So we have one line went to standard order 28, and then this line went to the bottom line went to the dropship order 15. So again, you can multi-purchase or select multiple lines and purchase. Those will go to one or more POs based off of the criteria that is being purchased on that sales line. So I can group dropships and standard purchases together, have those generate 2 separate POs. Some of the other functionality that we will also do to make this process a little bit easier is if I have a primary vendor set for any of these items that need to be purchased, again, we will group those items that need to be purchased by primary vendor, again, assuming that they're all either back ordered or all either dropship. We will group them together by their primary vendor, and we will go ahead, when we generate the PO, we will go ahead and set the vendor on the PO for you as opposed to the user having to manually set it. We'll also pull in any cost that you have specified under the vendor items tab, generating or making that easier, again, so that you're not having to manually update or manually change or manually set data on your purchase order. So again, that's all based off of on the individual item itself. So I'll drill into this Padron 1964. We have either a primary vendor that is set here. So setting this is it would set my primary vendor, or I would do it under the vendor items tab. I can set is primary on a vendor item here. If I had this specified as a vendor item, this would be a checkbox that I could check. Or I could also do it on the vendor side. So if I go to my vendor card, I go to General Cigars, and if I had any items set for that vendor, I can make this Arturo Fuente 858 that this is my primary vendor that it comes from. And again, it's a checkbox that I could check. If I can only have one vendor item or one vendor item combination set as primary. So if I were to have one set already and I go and I check it on this vendor, then it's going to make this the primary vendor, and deselect or unselect the primary vendor flag for whatever vendor might have been previously set as the primary. So that is purchasing from a sales document. And again, there's multiple different ways that we can do this. And this is really where using something like workflow comes into play, because we can really streamline this process. So for example, if I have a single purchasing agent that does all of my purchasing both for stock and for based off of sales demand, then I can use my workflow. I could split this document by quantity back order and have the back order go into a needs purchase queue, have what's fulfilled go into the warehouse queue and be picked. Again, I can use that workflow component to help streamline that or make that easier. And then that way my purchasing agent can be just watching the back order queue or needs purchase queue and know exactly what items they need to purchase. They can also be looking at the inventory search, being able to see what's back ordered out of the inventory search, and then they could be generating POs based off of that as well. And again, that would be more for stock or for sales demand. So we will be, we'll have a report that the users can run that will show inventory quantities that are below their reorder point quantities. That will then allow them to know what they need to purchase for stock. And so we will have when purchasing for inventory, replenishing your inventory, we'll have a report that the user can run that allows them to, because we can specify reorder points at the item level, you would be able to run a report to show me all inventory that has available quantity less than my reorder point quantity, and then that will give your user or your purchasing person an idea of what they need to purchase to replenish stock. We will have future plans for additional demand planning reports. And so be on the lookout for those items coming later.